us right now. My name is Brian Francis. I'm a contributing editor to Gamasutra.com.
Hello, everyone. If you are...
The other voice you're hearing is a one Mr. David O'Reilly, who has been kind enough to join us here today. But also, the other face down in the corner that you should know about is a one Alex Walrow. Hi, Alex. Can you remind us who you are?
Hey, thanks, Brian. I'm Alex from Gamasutra, an editor on Gamasutra.com, and we are very pleased today to be joined by a very special guest. David, thank you so much for coming on.
Hi, hello, hi everybody. Hi, Twitch.
Yeah,
Everybody watching.
There are a lot of people.
I haven't done anything like this before, so this is really cool.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well,
by
thank
all
you.
appearances, we haven't either. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm sorry, Brian. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I'll get the formalities out of the way. The introductions, the ceremonies needed. So today we're playing Everything, which is a game that was just released on Steam, but it's been out for a couple weeks on PS4. David O'Reilly here made it, and I believe was also programmed by. I had his name up here. Damien DeFede, right? DeFede? Did I say that right?
Di Fede. He's Italian.
He's Italian, Di Fede. Okay, so Damien Di Fede and David O'Reilly here made this game where you can literally be everything. David has been kind enough to join us today so that we may quiz him about how you make a game where you can be everything in games about philosophy and art and these other very great concepts which we love to see games tackling. But for the moment, I need to just kind of... Most games I tend to like just sort of letting them explain themselves when they show up on screen, but I just want you all, dear Gamasutra viewers, to see what it is I am right here, because I'm a forest walking around somehow. And I've never seen a forest walk in a game before, but yet, as Shakespeare predicted, the trees do march. This isn't really the place for Macbeth, but that's okay. Everything's a game where you can go up and down in size. I am now... I had to figure out what I was because the head was in the tin. I'm now some savanna creature upon a platform, and were I to go even smaller, I'm going to go be a rock for a second. My goal is to be a rock. Nope, I'm a fern. Okay, I'm some kind of fern tree now. You can shift between these two things and move throughout the world and uncover the thoughts and secrets that David has left scattered throughout the world. So David, just to get started, before I get started asking you questions and interrogating you about your thoughts about life, I'd just like to remind everyone who's watching that if you want to ask David questions, you can leave them in Twitch chat, and we will ask him. We'll pull them from chat and ask him on the stream. So David, this is kind of basic, and I know you've told this story to a few applications, other outlets before, but where did you get the idea for Everything, and what made you think this would be a tool to explore the ideas you were interested in?
I got the idea pretty quickly. I was interested, a lot of it comes from making the game before, which was called Mountain. And that was like a thing that ended up, like, it sort of came out, and then there was not much reaction, and then there was like this sort of positive reaction, and then followed by a negative reaction, and then a positive reaction towards a negative reaction, and then this weird thing started happening. Anyway, a lot of people, and that game sort of found, despite not sort of being getting reviewed a lot, it found a big audience, and so that started being a thing. And then I was like, okay, I really have to make a bigger game. I want to make something more ambitious, exploring the sort of same ideas that I think basically game engines or game engine technology is really good at getting into. And so I knew it would be something about sort of nature simulation and something probably, I don't know, just exploring life and death in an interesting way. And so it started with mountain selling, and then me being like, okay, I gotta spend this money on something, basically. And then I was sitting down one day, and then it just came to me that like you could easily start entering things, and you could sort of obtain the point of view of different things, and suddenly every object around you could be a playable character. And this is very close to like what you actually, if you look at like a history of animation, like early animation, a lot of it is exploring making things come to life. It's the basic thing that animation was like really like was exploring in the early days was giving things kind of consciousness, and that could be like a coat hanger or like a tail of an animal or something's mustache or a building. Everything was sort of living, and this was sort of a similar version of that, but with objects and with the essentially the world itself, with the whole universe. So that was the starting point. Was I got really excited about this idea of every object in the universe being a playable character, and then that led to thinking about groups of things and how everything is sort of a member of a group, even if it's a sort of living thing or a dead thing. It's kind of part of other things that look similar to it, even cars or trees or planets or whatever. So a bunch of these like ideas kind of rolled into one, and then it formed as a thing, and then basically I just wrote it out, the initial sort of draft of the idea, and then started working on it. And then 3 years later, this comes out.
So I want to circle back there for a minute. Like you talked broadly about the notion of animation, and like that is in a sense what this game is about, right? You are playing, you are an animating force, and you are sort of like moving between different objects and sort of moving them around. But your background is, as I'm sure everyone knows, in animation, in film, and that kind of thing. I wonder how did that work influence your approach to game design, like either positively or negatively?
Well, there's practical parts of it, which is like I know my way around 3D software. I know how to create objects really fast, and that was another thing that sort of enabled me to like not be too afraid of a project like this, because I know at the end of the day, like I can model anything within certain limits, and it's not going to look perfect or like super realistic, but I certainly have technical knowledge from making animation, and then I have production knowledge from basically organizing, making stuff in the past and sort of getting people together, making sure there's certain goals and deadlines and things, and bringing things over to the finish line. So loads of stuff carried over. I think everything I've learned in animation sort of carried over to games, but I had to learn a lot of new things too. And so it's been a real it's as much as I brought over, I've learned from scratch, and so that's been a whole. And I'm still learning. I think everybody's still learning about game development. It's still a very sort of nascent art form. It's like very advanced in some ways technologically, but it's also like still something that is just so unexplored and has so many things to still figure out.
Yeah, so let's talk about what you have learned in your travels. Like, I wonder, when you release something like your animation work, like when you release something like Please Say Something, right, like a short like that, into the world, how does the response to that differ from a game? Because it feels like, we were talking before the stream that like you don't necessarily have full control once you like put something out into the world as a creator. Right. But an animated short doesn't involve any interactivity, whereas this game does. So, like, how has the experience been different?
It's very different. I would say for a bunch of reasons. Please Say Something is sort of well known in the animation world, particularly in the sort of younger generation of animation animators and students and people who are just fans of animation. But it's not really known outside of that. And so the audience is much smaller for one, and with everything and with Mountain, these are both dealing with like a press and an audience that is just magnitudes bigger. I think people one thing I realized coming from animation that I think a lot of game developers and people in games might not appreciate a lot is the enormous audience there is for games and the enormous amount of people there are talking about them. Mostly people don't. I mean, the independent animation world is full of some really smart people making beautiful things, but the people that care about them it's a very small audience, and by and large, there's no real press for it. There's no reviews. happening for this kind of stuff. So in games, it's much bigger audience. The second part of it is that people are more emotionally invested in what happens in games because they're literally imprinting themselves into a world, as opposed to sort of just like receiving one. I think there's a greater emotional connection between what games are, between individual games and players, and so people can be very emotional, positive and negative, in how they relate, how they respond to games, in reaction, in contrast to animation stuff. In animation work, like people, you could do the craziest thing, and it just doesn't have people don't get as emotional as they can in the games world. So it's just bigger in sort of in almost every way.
Nice. Brian, do you have any strong emotions just now?
I found I have been both a whale and a boat, which are two of my favorite things. Two of my favorite things. I don't know if they're my favorite things in this game yet, but they are whales and boats. Their movement and how they move in the world are among my favorite things. So I was very excited to now just float about as a boat. Real quick, as I said, we're going to pull some questions from the chat. Yes, I am very frantic on the camera, Space Hamlet, but Space Hamlet would like to know... We're going to pull two questions in a row, by the way. Space Hamlet would like to know, can the PC version go crazier than with the loads of objects before the world gets pruned? Supposing the player has a nice rig.
That's a good point. Yes is the answer. The number of objects you can be is higher than it is on PS4. And that person correctly pointed out one of the ideas in the game, and this confuses a lot of people, maybe in part, and it's okay that happens. But if the frame rate drops below like 18 frames per second, a thing called a disaster happens, and what that is the whole basically objects cull, and it's masked by some sort of apocalyptic situation, and a lot of them are absurd and kind of crazy, and it's like the game is sort of coming alive and breaking its and like shouting at you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Brian, I told you about an instance of that earlier that I now realize I totally misunderstood. Sorry, go ahead.
Right, yeah, there's like because one of them says like copyright violation, but it's like a joke based on how serious people take copyright. But anyway, yes, you will never see them if you have a really good gaming rig, basically. And if you do have, I think there's been a couple instances I've seen on Steam of already this morning of people freaking out because they just see a bunch of those, but it's because they're minimum. You do need a decent computer to run this, and
that's kind of too bad. I don't know. We're just, I guess, going to spoil this a little bit. I ran into an effect where, at some point, for no reason, I could discern like the screen was just covered in like gold dollar signs. They started raining down from the top, and it was like, you won, you're number one. And I was like, what is this game trying to tell me? I was just a mountain in the ocean a minute ago, and I thought maybe that was some important message I failed to comprehend, but maybe it was just there was too many objects on screen. I don't know.
No, it was so there's rules behind it. So if it dips below 18 FPS for 6 seconds, I mean, these are rules. We might change them, but we're probably going to do a little update to that system. If it happens too much for people, then we're going to say, look, it seems like your specs might not be too high. I just think like if you're if the game generally runs, or if any game runs below a certain frame rate threshold, sometimes the code itself actually messes up, and it needs to do something to kind of cull itself. But anyway, yes, that is something that's it's related to the power of one's machine.
Nice. I think we had another question in chat from Laura E. Hall. What are your top favorite things in this game? Your top 5 favorite things to be? No pressure.
Hi, Laura. I think I never like saying that, because, I mean, let me think for a second, because I do definitely have objects that I think, oh, that's a pleasant thing. I think the landmasses are really like a nice thing. The sort of rippling continents.
Yeah.
They're one of my favorite things because they came up rather late in the production, because all those were initially static geometries like sliding around, and they just looked really bad. And then I just figured out, oh, we can deform these and make it like sort of like how actual land deforms. And then I figured out this kind of nice shader to do that, and started basically putting that together. And I just love how they move around.
Sorry, I crashed
also
the game.
Scaled. Pardon?
I crashed the game. My bad.
You broke everything.
No, that's
Brian.
okay.
Mm.
Wait, did it hit a disaster thing?
No, I just crashed it. I danced with a lot of objects in space, and I expect my CPU, which is trying to run a Skype call and stream this, may have been a bit exhausted.
Cool. Well, yeah, that might happen. Sorry about that. I actually don't see the stream has stopped updating for me, but that might be a similar thing where my computer can't keep up
Yeah,
with it.
luckily we're still streaming, so we can keep chatting with everyone.
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
You first, I insist.
But yeah, I mean, I have kind of a non-answer. But for favorite objects, I mean, the whole thing of I suppose the whole point of the game is that like the game is not giving you any favorites or any nothing is special about anything in it. It's how it's arranged that's special, and how you put it together that's special, and that's so everything has a kind of a genericness to it. Like in normal, it's a very unique sort of design problem to have, is balancing out all of the objects that are in the game, because you don't really want to make one be like spectacular. There is one, if you do this sort of, let's say, campaign of the game, the normal loop of it, there is something you'll come across towards the end that has, say, a lot of detail that's interesting, but in general the whole thing is making this sort of balancing act, so things have a kind of a genericness to them, so that the game itself is not telling you, hey, this is special, because really nothing in the game is special, and all of that is done to allow you to create the specialness, or to find out what you like the best, and so it's like that. So that's a sort of an idea in play in the game.
I like Alan Watts the best, and so I would love to know why you chose to sort of splice in all these little audio bon mots from philosopher Alan Watts about the nature of existence.
I'm glad you like Alan Watts. Yes, he's to me he's a real amazing speaker. He was an incredible thinker and a speaker, and just a very he approaches philosophy and thought and all these ideas about nature in the same way I do, which is a very kind of non-serious, like simple, straight, like humorous way, where it's not like this. It's just a different idea of what you might think of as philosophy. It's not. And he would call it. He called it. Repeatedly, this is entertainment. This is not. Don't think of it as anything other than entertainment. And he says this even within the game itself, like to think of it like somebody playing like a musical classic. Like these are very old ideas. Nothing in there is sort of like Alan Watts's ideas necessarily, but he managed to phrase things, ideas about the world in a way that was just so like unencumbered by jargon and dogma and anything else. You don't have to believe anything. It's just saying, hey, consider this point of view, and you can intuitively just sort of follow along without having to remember anything. It's just a very beautiful thing. It's beautiful on the level of just the texture and the timbre of his voice and the way he speaks and the rhythm of that. Like that's a gorgeous thing to just have in anything. But it's also the what he's talking about. The content of it is something that I think is just a beautiful thing that I feel like a lot of people might benefit from. Certainly, it's something that I benefited from.
Yeah, it was a little unsettling. I just recently got into Alan Watts. I started listening to some of his recorded lectures
Yes.
for the first time about a week before this came out on PS4.
Oh, that's amazing.
And like so, a couple days after I started, checking out what he was all about, I got a code in my inbox for this game, and I started playing it. And then within a day, I'd found those quotes, and I was just real,
Oh, cool.
just real unsettling in a creepy way. But good. I wonder what was. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, in a very I would love to talk to you for an hour about the nature of interconnectedness and everything in general. But what was involved with getting Watts's voice into the game from a practical perspective? Like, was there any rights involved? Did you have to just ask? Was it tricky at all?
Yes. It actually took about a year of negotiation to do it. So that, I mean, I think a lot of people assume that it's sort of public domain, and certainly people upload his stuff to YouTube a lot, but it's really not. I wanted to do this in a sort of, in a legitimate way, and as it happened, like nobody had licensed. There's 2.5 hours of material licensed in the game. It's by far the biggest licensing project of any Alan Watts material ever done, and so mostly people license Alan Watts material in like 10 seconds here or 20 seconds there, and it's for a commercial, and it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that. He has a really high market value. He's been in like Apple commercials and all sorts of things. And
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's like there's a very, like, he's not in a lot of things. He's not licensed a lot because it's I guess it's just like that. And so anyway, I found an email that turned out to be for his son, and then I just emailed somewhere in the middle of production. I said, "Look, I would love to. I'm making this game, and it's my ideal. It's like my dream project, and it's like I've wanted to do this for years, and I would love to. It would be so magic to include your father's words in this." And so I would just make videos and send videos back and forth to his son, and we just started chatting. And at a certain point, I was like, "Well, I'm actually, I'd like to license a lot of material because games, as we know, like in games, you're expected. A short game is 2 hours, right? And if you think of other media like commercials or short films or whatever, it's or even making music, it's normal to license." 10 seconds, 20 seconds. So, but I wanted this to be something that was a lot of material there. And even though it's an optional part of the game, you can switch it off, or you never have to open a single Alan Watts sort of bubble in the game. I wanted there to be a lot of material because I think there's a lot of overlap between what he's talking about and what the game is about. And so, it just, I just had to we just sort of kept discussing it, and I think as soon as he understood that this, the sort of the scale of the project, and that we were really serious about making this thing that it's not like something that's tacked on, like it's an intimate expression of the same ideas that Alan Watts was talking about. In other words, it's not really exploiting it as much as sort of complementing it. And also, obviously, like talking about the potential of this game reaching so many more people, an entire generation that will have never heard of Alan Watts. And in general, I think our generation now, like most people, aren't really aware of what a special person he was. He's kind of one of the strangest things that I found out is that actually his biggest audience per country is in Ireland, which shocked me as an Irish person. But anyway, I think he for me, he resonated so much, and I felt like this is all material that is so relevant to any human being that I kind of I felt I basically communicated how this could have a huge potential for growing the audience of people that are fans of Alan Watts and so on. And so anyway, we figured it out. It was it was very. I mean, I get along really well now with Mark, who's Alan's son, and we managed to figure that out, and which was great. But it did take a long time, and actually it was only really confirmed a few months before shipping. We didn't know if that would get locked down, and it very well could have shipped without it. But we had already sort of integrated it, but licensing and all of that stuff is a difficult thing. It's a difficult dance to do because I've generally avoided it in lots of projects because it's an expensive thing, and it involves this weird awkward dialogue between money and art.
So I'm guessing you didn't. Did you not have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to get Watts?
I didn't have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. It was a decent bill. It was the biggest single bill of anything in the game, but it was definitely like it was a special sort of thing. And part of the trade-off is if you go, which I very happily did, is in the game. If you go into the audio section, there's a link to the Alan Watts website where there's more audio stuff to download. So I guess so that's a kind of a cross-promotional thing. But
yeah,
I didn't think of it as cross-promotion because it's like something that it was like, of course. I mean, the thing is, like, people usually if you hear and agree with like a few minutes of Alan Watts, you're going to want to hear more. And so that's there for that.
Go ahead, Brent. So.
Yeah, I need to share two thoughts. One,
Yeah.
Whenever I take on the form of an animal, I start running with that animal with this like wacky circular animation you've made for movement. It just kind of says screw it to anything resembling natural movement, and they just turn into Sonic the Hedgehog, which leads me to the second thought being like rolling around at the speed of sound. It just feels like the Sonic the Hedgehog game all of a sudden, and it amuses me a lot.
I mean, that's a thing. It's really funny because when you work on a thing like that for as we did for that movement was updated for probably a year and a half. That particular code, that script is very complicated. What it's doing, I know it looks really silly, but it's a complicated enough bit of work. You kind of stop laughing at it, and then you're just like, oh yeah, that's normal. That's how things move in the game, and then you just sort of absorb it. But yeah, I think it is something that I think is sort of one of the weirder aspects of it for people just approaching it, because so many other things in it, I guess, look naturalistic and or somewhat normal. But I never really minded it. It's a very deliberate decision, and it's something that, like, in animation, there's always ideas like this that you do because they're just interesting or funny, or they're like a solution to a problem. And it is something that I did in a short one time that I thought, oh, this is cool. This could save. I mean, the thing is, the budget of the entire game would probably be more than doubled if creatures were to move in a realistic way. And this was a very expensive game to make for what it was, but considering all of the systems tied together, all of the worlds put together, and all of the sound and the music and all of these aspects, all of that is probably as much work as realistic running and walking.
Yeah, and I think
and become the city.
I think an expense like Watts' voice, which is significant, is really key to a project like this. I know, for me personally, Brian and I were talking about this before the stream. I read a book on Zen once a while ago, but a fellow game maker named David Kanaga wrote Yeah, so he wrote a deep dive into Panoramical for Gamasutra, and it's up on the website now. It was a year or two ago, and it's a trip to read. It's really interesting. And at the very end, he included a passage from a book called "Dropping Ashes on the Buddha." And that passage meant so much to me. It was about the nature of reality as all being one. That I bought the book and got really into it.
Cool.
And those ideas are not in any way new, as you mentioned, but I can't think of any game I've ever played that communicates what it is to look at existence as a hegemony, like as a single unified whole, like this game does. And I think that's really interesting. I don't know, have you ever seen this done in games before? Like, what was it that inspired you to like? Because you mentioned you had this idea for years, like it was like a dream project. Like, where did it start?
Well, yes, that's true. I think, and let me say that I think in general, people's notion of Zen is very warped in popular culture. I think when people think of Zen, they think of like a solemn sort of Buddha, and then a garden with lines on it, and wind chimes and corny art and stuff like that.
Meditating on a mountain, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of laden with a certain imagery, but that's like a misdirect. It's really like it's the most impossible thing. It's you have to get every idea of it, every image, every sound, like out of your head. It's nothing. It's like thin air. It's the most like empty belief in a certain way, and so it's actually a very beautiful thing when you get into it, and then you start thinking about. So it never gets old. I think for me as a philosophy. That's the first thing. The other thing you were asking was about oneness, and I think some people approach everything with this idea like, okay, yeah, it's one thing, I get it. And the thing is, it's the idea of oneness is sounds simple and it's easy to dismiss. But because it's almost impossible for our brains to imagine, because our brains are constantly focused on things, and so that's the basis of this whole game is in showing all of the things, but then showing them as essentially behaving, and their core, their guts of what they are the same. Everything does the same stuff in the game. Everything moves the same way. The game itself doesn't really care what you are. The game is doing the same logic on every group, on every single object in the game. There's thousands of them. But you care what you are. You know what you are in the game. But the game, strictly speaking, treats everything the same way. Mm-hmm. So, and there's a key point, I think. So it is a kind of thing, and I'm saying this because I think it's like it's an idea that is very tricky to communicate in language, but I think games are very good at communicating it through logic and through mechanics and through systems. So, and both of those are kind of aside. So, what you were talking about. But your question was about.
Yeah, it was kind of just a long anecdote, and really, I circled back at the end to ask. You mentioned this had been a dream of yours when you were talking to Alan Watts' son. I assume that means that it predates Mountain. Then, is that true?
Actually, a part of it does. Yeah. So the initial idea was a different version of this. It wasn't the entire universe. It was more like an island, and that it was an island floating through space. And it was like, but it had a lot of qualities that were similar, in that it kind of had one of everything. It had it had a village, and it had every sort of type of building and tree and stuff. It was a sort of similar thing. And I started building that project about 5 years ago, or maybe 4.5 years ago. I started building that just the same way someone would build like a train set. I just started building tons of 3D objects and laying them out, and it was this. I was obsessed with this sort of this project that I could bring all of the other sort of things from my other game, animations together and stuff, and make one kind of universal sort of game. sort of a kind of a thing where the world was the main feature, not necessarily the characters in it, or the world was the characters, something like that. I forget exactly what the how to kind of pitch that thing, but it was a project that started. I worked on it, and then after something like a few months, I moved off it, and then and then it was because it was too big, and actually the file became way too big to work on, and every time I hit save, it would be like 5 minutes, so I just stopped. And then when Mountain came out, fast forward through all of that, and I was like, oh, it's time to do a big project, and then this came up. So it was a different concept, but it had the same thrust. I wanted to do something of this sort of universality, something that was saying something not about specifics, but about the totality, let's say.
I am sort of reluctant to ask this, but given your investment in the project, how do you feel about the way it's been received? We don't look at reviews or anything too closely, but it seems like it's a relatively positive reception. Do you feel like what you were trying to convey with a project like this has been heard, or not so much?
I think it has, and it hasn't. Like, it has, in some cases it's just, the thing is, I try to avoid reading things, because even in a positive review, I'll sometimes see a line or a phrase or a word or something that's like, that I'm like, how did you think that, or how did that, and then that misinterpret, I'll be like, because, so it's like, all of it is great, but it can never exactly be this thing that, the thing is like, the best interpretation I've had of anything is going to come from just people in, like, playing it by themselves without any reviews or anything else going on, that have their own personal subjective experience with it, and that are just enjoying it. And I think that's as valid as anything. And like, children play this game. Like, we've had 2, 3, 4-year-olds play it, and they're just enjoying it and having a blast. And to me, that's as valid. The only that's even more valid in a certain way, because it's just like so gleeful, and it's very obviously something that is about not having a real point. It's about letting the player create the point, or the sort of goal. And so, when the only times I would sort of like disagree with things is when people try and get into the trying to interpret it on some other level, and sort of intellectualize it a bit. I think that's when it sort of starts veering off the track a little bit, because I think this and the same way with Mountain, they're very simple projects. They're not they're done in a very simple way, and or like maybe not done in a simple way. I don't know, but they're basically they're very straightforward, and they're not. I've never been a fan of, and I think when people have a whiff of like art or philosophy in the games world, and it's the same in animation, there's an immediate turnoff. But I have that exact same turnoff that other people have. I'm not a particular fan of postmodern art or of postmodern philosophy, and I think it's way overcomplicated. And that's why I have a much simpler approach to it, and it's much sort of it's filled with humor and things. And then sometimes people even complain about that. They say, well, how can this be funny? It's supposed to be serious. It's like so there's this. It's really strange how so sometimes there will be responses that I'm just like, I don't know how they came away with that, because that was almost the opposite of what I was communicating. But the thing is, I don't really respond, or I try my best not to, because I really think, because in a certain way nobody's wrong, and because I think I do put I do think like a simple playful interpretation, like a child playing it is the most valid interpretation, as anything.
Yeah, I think you're right, Brian. How you doing in there? I'm hearing some noises.
The noises are just me delightfully finding new things to be and places to go.
Brian, are you on a keyboard and mouse?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, great. We just put that in the last few weeks because and I wasn't expecting it to work actually because we worked so long on the PlayStation controller, and we're just testing on that. But you seem to be doing a good job here.
Yeah, it's not. Oh my God, flock mode, sweet. I'm excited for this.
Flock mode's really good.
Wait, by holding Q, and then the C button lets you C button lets you release your flock.
So this is.
Sorry, I might have literally just bumped into the point where. Oh, I see. Wait, maybe. Now I'm a pom pom. Okay, I see. Okay, sorry, I might have been breaking what I just said about the keyboard working out pretty well. I think my feedback on the keyboard is that everything is extremely unconventional in terms of where my hand is going, except for WASD. But
yes,
I'm very, in this case, I'm generally a person, have to be for this stream, who has to be open to what is going on in order to experience it. So I was willing to I was willing to roll with it, but it was very reaching all the way to the 8 key to dance. Also, what I'll say is, on the one hand, that is not what I expected, and it makes me it is an off-putting thing that makes me actively input into it. It's so different that it is.
But it is a tricky thing. It is a tricky thing. We really. Some things are double mapped. Some things are you can press one key or another key.
Yeah.
And it's all done basically to simplify because it was coming from console and controller buttons to try and translate that into this thing. But it is the things you do in the game. The fact that the basic thing is smaller or bigger is an unconventional thing.
Yeah.
And yes, the 8 is very far away. The reason that's far away is that it's sort of a dancing is kind of a pause state. So you can just sort of tap it. It's the one thing I think autoplay doesn't take over dance. So autoplay will always jump into your game if you just let it go.
Yeah.
So 8 is sort of like an alternate pause button, but yes, it is a tricky thing. And then the keyboard is an interesting way to even play any kind of a game, I think, because it is coming from a typewriter. It's a sort of an odd thing to contend with.
That's true. I never thought of us playing games on typewriters before.
I guess if you could hook up a USB typewriter keyboard and still play Call of Duty on a typewriter. In theory.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we should talk. We should talk about the nitty gritty of being a game developer. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I want to get one question from the chat, and then I want to jump in to that.
Yeah.
That's a great thing I want to jump to, but I want to make sure the chat is being heard. Scrolling back through the chat, Wabe Walker, you talked a little bit about grappling with feedback a minute ago, but one thing Wabe Walker brings up is I remember back when Mountain came out, there were lots of people who were sort of jamming with you on that, what it is on the surface, simple and engaging kind of vibe. But on the other hand, I distinctly recall people who were angrily labeling it not a game. And I'm sure that must have been so baffling for you coming from the animation world, going what is going on here? Why do these people care about what is game and what is not game? How did you sort of grapple with that? Nothing you're making is inherently polarizing in content. It's not dealing with subjects
it's not.
I mean, maybe existentialism is, but how do you grapple with that?
I mean, it was a little bit confusing, but look, it's like this. If you're creating anything, if you're a creative person in any capacity, the one point of view is you're synthesizing stuff that's already in the universe. I believe that. But you are also trying to do it in a kind of new way or in a new form. And so the only things that really interest me in animation and design and games are things that I can say, well, that's going to be a new thing, and that's trying something new. I have absolutely no interest in repeating other things that are great. I love Dark Souls. I have no interest in also making Dark Souls. Or lots of other games. So it's like, so you're always sort of chasing things that are interesting and new. And for me, it was so obvious that that what I'm attracted to in games, this thing of simulation, of having an experience that's fairly low impact, that's not based around conflict, that you can just enjoy, that you can leave on in the background, that's essentially using all of the tools developed for all other games and doing something different with it. So to me, it was so obvious. Like, yeah, this is a game. Whatever. I mean, I use that as a term of convenience. I don't really care if people disagree. So, but it was a strange thing that came up, and it's funny because there's nothing like contentious about anything I've said or about me personally, and my own. I mean, my own sort of definitions or anything like that. It just sort of emerged. And the ironic thing is, so the short version of what I just said is, the whole idea of making anything is to create something new, and then by extension that's going to stretch definitions of things, because it has to encompass this new thing. The ironic thing about it all is that the games themselves, both Mountain and Everything, are in a very, I think, clear way about how the world itself is categorized. And so in a funny way, these games that are about categorization have this big problem with how they're with some people who are obsessed with categorizing. So it's a strange thing, but I don't mind it. It never gets under my skin, and I think if people want to call it a screensaver, that's fine. It's the best screensaver ever made, by far, and it probably ever will be made. I really don't mind if people call it that, and I don't mind if people don't dislike it or whatever. Like, it's not up to me I can't change anybody's mind about a thing. I do work really hard, and I'm really sincere about my approach to these things. It's not something that's like I think one of the sort of misinterpretations of Mountain, and I suppose some people will have with Everything, is that, oh, this is kind of a joke or something like that. But there are jokey type games out there, and I also think that there is truth inside every joke as well. But and so it's not an awful way to characterize something, but I work way too hard on these things in order to just do for it to be kind of like a middle finger or something, and of course they contain jokes within them, but like it's definitely not done in an ironic, just to sort of just in the spirit of annoying people.
Yeah, it does raise like the thorny question of how do you put something up for sale on a marketplace like Steam or the PSN? Like, how do you describe it as like a lighthearted but utterly earnest attempt to talk about the nature of existence? Like, there's no Steam category for that, I don't think, not yet.
No. I mean, yes, there's like several different ways of interpreting the game and doing that in a way that like people will be more or less interested in it. I'm definitely, and so I mean, people do this all the time. Like, people talk about their work to like an art curator totally differently than they talk to like a merchandiser or whatever, because different things will be interesting to both people. But from the very beginning of this game, I was like, well, this is going to have more playable characters than any game ever made, and so it has aspects. It has like infinite playtime, which is like hyperbolic in one way, but it is literally designed to not end. So it's like, so there's that, and there are aspects of it in sort of, let's say, game language that I think are very unique and might be interesting for people. But to be honest, I don't know. I don't know if it even Mountain was sold as ambient mountain simulator or something, and it sold hundreds of thousands of copies just without any explanation or sort of
Marketing
whatever.
campaign. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Without any marketing.
Oh my God, what am I doing?
So it's like,
What have I done? What have I done?
You're existing, Brian. Just hang in there.
What have I done?
All right.
I'm now an army of zeppelins. I turned the animals into zeppelins. Sorry.
that's great.
So like, this is what
Dun, 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 dun. Sorry, that's what.
this game. Yeah.
That's
Go
my
ahead.
reaction to that moment.
That's beautiful. I mean, the become ability is like my favorite thing. I think out of all of them, I think it's something that we didn't know would work out, and then it did, and then it was like cool.
It's just so weird. Like if you take all of if you take human consciousness out of it, there's absolutely no reason why that's weird, right? Like it's just atoms in a different configuration.
Yes.
But anyway,
That's some violation of the laws of physics, but energy transference.
I mean, it would happen. It's just 1 in a million. It could happen.
I want to ask a game dev question, like Alex said.
Yeah.
You've had a really cool career as both an animation artist, and now as a video game developer and designer. We talked earlier about what the difference is between finishing and releasing these two different kinds of projects. But I want to know what is I was calling this, when I was typing this in chat earlier, I was calling this like the daily bullshit. Like, what is kind of like, how do you feel about the difference between the daily small tasks you have to do to make your idea? What do you feel is the biggest difference in these two mediums, and the things that aren't exciting, don't necessarily make you say, this is my beautiful grand idea, but you're just sitting there going, crap, like, this is what I have to do to make this darn thing even function? Like what? How do you talk about the difference between those two things?
Do you mean the difference between animation and games, or between the small day-to-day tasks and something else?
The small day-to-day tasks of animation versus the small day-to-day tasks of games.
Okay, they're very different.
Yeah.
That's a whole topic that could take a long time, but I'll just say this. Like, games develop in a way that I can only describe as organic. Like, in that they tend to start as a kind of a core and then grow outward. In a way where with animation, it's much more like a timeline, where it's like a thing that sort of has more like a branching thing, where it has this one sort of direction, and then that direction sort of fills out. But in games, it's like this pronged shape. And here's why. Here's a more practical example. In animation, you're basically you're setting up a timeline of, and typically you'll have a storyboard or an animated storyboard that you're filling in with scenes. And then once those things are rendered, they're essentially locked into place, and they're very hard to change. And so once you're doing that, and you're trying to make that cohesive, it's very tricky, and you kind of have to stick to things. And in games, you can make fundamental changes to one part of it, and they affect the entire organism of the thing. And so it's so interconnected, and the changes can be so dramatic, even towards the very end of production, that it's a much more enjoyable thing. Now, there's other things that are not so easy. So in animation, in 3D animation, you can get away with quite a lot of things. You can show because you're dealing with shots, with layouts. So this is a static shot where most of the things aren't going to move. You can get away with a lot, and you can paint stuff up, and you can just sort of fudge things. In games, every side of every object, underneath of it, every angle needs to be perfect. Close up, far away, it needs to read. And so there's a lot more work in modeling that and also these things are lit. If people know my animation work, I don't use a lot of lights, usually flat shading. So these things are lit, so they have the added problems of just being better colored, have normals, have UV maps. It's a lot more stuff. Again, this is sort of like, I could talk about this for a long time, but it is a very different process. But speaking only as somebody who does, I'm mostly very involved in the technical aspect of what I'm doing. Even if I have a team working with me, I still do lots of stuff that I do, like animation and modeling and shaders and compositing and all that stuff. And day to day, I enjoy the game iteration process more because you really feel like you're building this 3D universe. And in animation, even though it's 3D, ultimately you're building stuff that's going to be just 2D images. That's your ultimate end form of that is JPEGs or whatever, and they're flat. And but I really enjoy the iteration process of games more. It does take a lot longer.
So that sort of begs the question: why? Well, let's close it out here because it's a dumb, silly, fun ending question.
Can't let you do that, Alex. I'm gonna need one more question after you ask that question.
Okay, well then you go first.
All right, fair. Okay, we'll let Alex close it out. Eschaton12 in the chat has been asking semi-patiently for the whole stream if you have any advice for young 3D artists. I think if you ask the question, can you talk about art, it's very hard. But I guess what advice would you have for a 3D artist who is maybe inspired by your path and wants to forge their own way, taking keys from your direction?
The thing to know is that anything specifically that's ever happened to me is never going to be valid for anybody else, because you're coming into a world from a totally different ecosystem and with totally different rules. But the core things are going to be the same. And here's what I'll say: try and allow space for yourself to grow your talent without clients or teachers being involved. In other words, to just do that for yourself. The more you can allow, and this is the problem I think with a lot of education in art right now, is that you're basically sort of trained to please an authority figure, which is a kind of a stand-in for a client. Neither a client nor a teacher will really you won't produce your best work if trying to impress a person like that. Maybe you will if you really respect that person and you value their opinion. But being able to have space to grow, and what does that? And in practical terms, that actually kind of means space to do nothing other than play around. Space to do nothing is really important to grow as an artist, and to be able to just do tutorials and to look at stuff and to just be sensitive to what's going on around you. That's something that's undervalued, I think, in how people grow as an artist. And the way I did that was I basically saved up some money from doing jobs, and then I moved to Berlin, which was a very cheap place to live. And I had my pressure to make money went down. And when that happened, so people talk all the time of creative cities. This is a very creative city. When you get down to the actual why that is, it's because it's cheap to live there, usually. I mean, almost always. So I think that's the best advice I could give, is just give yourself some space and don't kill yourself over it. Don't put yourself under too much pressure. Don't worry about style. I mean, I could go on about this for hours. I should do this on something like that.
Yeah.
I sympathize with people starting out. I think the world looks crazy, and it looks like all the ideas are taken, but just believe me, they're not. And it'll be okay. But just I should do I should do a stream or something.
You should do an AMA, a Twitch, like just make your own Twitch channel. That was great. I mean, I think
I will do I think I will do a Twitch channel later this year, because I have strong feelings about education in art, and I think I disagree with in general how it's taught, and so but anyway, that's another thing. But
and yet you might become the figure that they respect and try to make things for. How? No,
never. I would never try and do that to me. But I think I sympathize with. I definitely, because I've had to do this myself, and it's tough, and there are unique problems, but there's also it's possible to navigate through it without losing your mind.
Yeah. Before Alex, I'm going to interrupt you once again.
No, it's okay. I'll just say we got to wrap this up, so I will cede my question to Space Hamlet from the chat, who wants to know, David, if you have an opinion on autoplay in this game and how it brings it closer to something you might imagine being installed in an art gallery?
Well, it's doing a few things. It's basically it's an idea stolen from nature, which is that it's essentially nature's an automatic thing that just happens. Closer to being an art gallery, I don't think it's more or less important or significant as a piece of art if it's in an art gallery or if it's in your living room. Actually, I think it's cooler if it's in your living room. But I guess because you can just let it go, and it doesn't need to be interacted with. It's kind of comfortably could be hung on a wall potentially. I honestly picture it being something like if you have friends over or if you have a party or whatever, you could leave this on in the background and have autoplay do its thing. It does its thing slower than a human playing it, so it's not. But I mean, it will technically it will spoil things technically, but at a certain point in the game, when a lot of things are unlocked, it won't spoil anything, and it's just something that's like a never-ending simulation of nature.
Yeah,
And,
I did just that. Actually, we had a barbecue last weekend, and I left this on, and it's great. Like, people love it. People love walking by, and they see it moving, and they're like, was that a movie or something? What's going on? And it's, no, it's just hang out, have a drink, watch it.
It's just a thing like that. And there is a thing called documentary mode, which unlocks a little bit later in the game, where it shows the wiki articles for each object, because most of the things in the game are actual, like, existing things. There's some alien things, but not a lot. But, like, this documentary mode will show you, like, little things, and I really love that mode. I think it's one of my favorite little things in the game, where you'll see this just sort of 3D encyclopedia simulation that I really love. So hopefully people use it for that and get it, and have it there. I absolutely don't mind if it's something that lives in the background of people's lives.
Yeah, like existence.
God, yeah, we could. I hate every time we do this. Every time we interview, bring someone on to chat with us. We finish the first hour, and I go, we could do another hour. Like, so thank you, David.
Yeah, I could keep chatting. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. This was a lot of fun. Thank you, everyone in the chat, for showing up and asking great questions.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, this is always great because this doesn't happen without our great guests, and it doesn't happen without great people in the chat to help us ask quite great questions of our guest. Alex and I do the best we can, but in order to learn about game development, if game development is collaborative, then so is learning about game development. So thank you all for spending another hour with the Gamasutra Twitch channel. If you liked what you saw and heard today, we appreciate it if you would scroll down and click the follow button so that you can get notifications whenever going live. We have a whole slate of great game developers due to come on in the next few weeks, and want to give you insight from all of them. The game is Everything by David O'Reilly, who's down there in the bottom left-hand corner. David, where can they find you on Twitter? Can they find you on, where do you want them to go?
I'm on the internet as @David O'Reilly on Twitter and Instagram, and the David O'Reilly on Facebook. But yeah, mostly sort of Twitter. You can find it all through there. My website's davidoreilly.com, and the game's website is everything-game.com.
Sweet. And the game is now out on Steam, and it was already out on PS4 a couple weeks ago. So with that, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.